Like to say hello, good morning. Welcome to CWCB's Riverside Chat. I really wish we were actually at a Riverside or in person to have this discussion today, but nonetheless, we're excited to have you here to learn more about the direction and the vision for the water plan update. My name is Matt Lindburg. I'm with Brown and Caldwell, and we're serving as a general contractor along with a number of other firms supporting the CWCB in the update of the water plan, and also working with a number of local experts across the state who are working with basin roundtables to help them update their basin implementation plans. And I'd like to just say a quick word of thanks to the folks on Basin Roundtables. They've been doing all kinds of work to update their basin implementation plans, and it's been a big effort so far, and there's a little ways to go. And so thank you very much to folks who are on those Basin Roundtables and working on those BIPs. I'll also mention that CWCB staff have been really hard at work outlining their vision for the water plan update and talking with folks about areas we should be focusing on. And we got some really good feedback from folks during the Summer Water Congress Convention, and also thinking back to the listening sessions that the CWCB hosted back in June. Staff have been thinking about that feedback that we received during those outreach activities. And this is another opportunity for outreach. And we know that the plan is important to Coloradans, and we're excited to share our vision for the water plan update today. You know, staff, as we go through this morning's webinar, are going to share their vision for the water plan update, but we also want to hear from you, folks who are tuning in, who are stakeholders, about additional considerations we need to be thinking about in the water plan update. Where has the water plan been strong, and where have you been able to use it, and where do we need to build on it? So those are the kinds of things that we'd like to hear from you once we're able to share the vision for the water plan update. Our primary feedback loop for today's event is through engagecwcb.org. And if you may have noticed, I changed my name in this Zoom format to the website. So if you look right here, I think you should see the engagecwcb.org website. I'd encourage you to visit that website. It has some fact sheets that summarize what you're going to hear about today and what staff are going to be talking about. It also has a survey that you can complete to provide feedback, and feel free to fill out that survey completely, or whatever portions of it you would like to complete. Really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the direction of the water plan update. And I'll just mention that today's event is being recorded, so you can go to the CWCB's YouTube channel, and or you can also find this recording on engagecwcb.org. And so really the CWCB staff are the stars of the show today. I'm just here to kind of help the conversation along, but I'd like to bring in Director Becky Mitchell to the conversation. And should I call you Becky or Director Mitchell? What's your preference?
Matt, just call me Becky. I think that's fine.
Okay, perfect, great. Okay, so I'd like to get some of your thoughts. This was the first ever statewide water plan. It was put together with an eye towards future updates, and we've learned a lot about implementing the plan and what an update should look like. But I'd like to first of all thank you for your leadership in helping set the course for the water plan update. And your involvement in the original water plan. I know you were sort of up to your neck in that plan and had a lot of involvement. So I was wondering if you could share a little bit with us about what it took to get that initial water plan off the ground.
Thanks for the question, Matt, and thanks everyone for being here. First off, I know that this is an incredibly important issue as we look forward and as we plan for our future. I think massive involvement is what's important to success. And so as we look back, we kind of have to look at where we found success and where that came from. And so I think when I think about what the catalyst was to bring us to where we are today, where we're doing the first update of the first original water plan, I had to think about the history that went into that. And one of the things that I think was a catalyst was the situation that we were in. So if you think about 2013 and the time that the executive order came out, we were coming out of some really big drought situations, but there was also fire, there was also flood. It was the kind of perfect storm, which is a horrible term, to be perfectly honest, but it was the perfect storm of awareness that we needed to plan more. But on the other side of that, we also had these existing infrastructure, and by infrastructure, I meant the human infrastructure that was the basin roundtables and then some work that we have been doing on the ground with stakeholders already. And so I think we were in a perfect place to use really all the stakeholders, all the folks that were so invested in water. So when we think about the first water plan, it wouldn't have been possible without those stakeholders, without the leadership of the Water Conservation Board, without the investment of the legislature, without the undying commitment by the staff. I think about like what some of the staff were going through at that time, but then also the willingness of the NGOs to like really just put their back into what we needed to do. Utilities were standing by. I think that's part of the situation that we were in with drought, fire, flood. I think everybody became focused on how do we work on this together. Agricultural groups. I think that was incredibly important to get us to where we were able to do something like that with the all hands on deck.
Wow, yeah, a lot of really important drivers that forced the urgency of that. But then you're right. I mean, it was a huge lift involving lots of different folks, and it was really, really collaborative. So thanks for providing that perspective. I think that nicely helps set up the context for where we are today. And thinking about that big lift, and also thinking about the basin implementation plans. When I think about how much time they had to put those basin implementation plans together and the limited time that they had to do it, I marvel at the really great content that was included in those. And, we've allowed more time to update the basin implementation plans this time around, but there's still a lot to do. And we've heard from a number of folks that we need to be more efficient going forward, and we need to make the process more streamlined. And so I was wondering if we could bring Russ Sands into the discussion now and have him share a little bit about his vision and our approach to the water plan update. Russ?
Well, thanks so much, Matt and Director Mitchell, for being here. This is great. I'm really excited to have this event today and really kind of kick off this big public foray into sharing some of our thoughts. And of course, we had the listening sessions last June. We got a lot of great input there. And we've laid out at that time kind of a vision for how we saw the update process going. And we've roughly divided that up into 3 9-month segments. And this is the first of those segments. So it's the scoping phase, which kind of goes from now until June. After that's the drafting phase. And then after that, kind of the public comment and finalizing phase. And there's a lot of folks we have to coordinate with in the middle, including our board and the legislature, and working with all of you. And this is really just the first steps in kind of getting some of that information out there so that you guys can help let us know where we're on track. Again, I'm Russ Sands, CWCB Section Chief in Water Supply Planning Section, and our group is really tasked with kind of maintaining, updating the water plan. And yet the truth of the matter is it's the entire CWCB. And even the bigger truth is it's broader than us, and all of us are working on this together. And as Matt noted, the basin implementation plans and the roundtables really feed into this effort, as does a broad array of public comment. So one thing that we've really heard through some of the conversations that we've been having, and I think this was true even just in how we did the technical update, but to really try to focus on really a shorter, more web-friendly, streamlined document. And maybe that means pulling it out like we did with the technical update when we had kind of previously the statewide water supply initiative, now the analysis and technical update to the Colorado Water Plan, or just the technical update, but really pulled that out into a more accessible volume 1 document that was shorter and kind of had the bulk of the information, but you could always take a deeper dive and go into this volume 2. So that's one thing we're hearing about, and I think it really plays into some of the concepts that were just teed up for you. But if the first water plan was this Herculean effort to get the water plan out and to acknowledge that there would be updates, this effort is very much about how are we going to do these updates moving forward, and what do they look like, and are there ways that we can increasingly streamline that effort to not always make it so time intensive, cost intensive. Obviously there are budget challenges, and I'm eternally grateful for the hundreds of volunteers that we have that are helping put their time into making this something, because it's so important to all of us. So that's one thing we've heard, and it really shapes how we're doing the update. I think another thing that's really come to light in talking with some stakeholders and with staff is just an increased desire to really be action focused in what we're doing. And of course, there are numerous actions in the water plan, but creating more of a line of sight, again, speaking to the streamlining. So how we get from kind of the values down to the actions and what that looks like, and just making things a little bit more clear and action focused in the near term. So really hearkening back to those no low regret strategies. Some of you probably worked on those and recall those that predated the water plan. But really thinking about this timeline as we're looking out with a lot of our analysis out to 2050, and perhaps that horizon changes if we get better climate data and modeling and projections that can look out farther, which those maybe exist, but on the population side has been a constraint that we might have the ability to push that out to 2060 or 2065. And we think about all the actions and the big objectives and the things that are looking out to 2050. I think there's an acknowledgement that as we have this update, and we're doing these updates in about a 7-year cycle. So when you think about where we started in the process between and now trying to land this water plan update in 2022, we're in a 7-year update cycle. So it really kind of, we need to know what those 2050 issues are, certainly. We're looking at that future challenge, the risk, how we can mitigate those, the potential gaps across those now 5 scenarios. But having one objective of how we get there maybe isn't the focus so much as what are we gonna do now? What are we gonna do in the next 5 to 7 years in this next update cycle that slowly helps us build, and then we take that next interval check-in, kind of consistent with this scenario planning concept, right? We're gonna check in, see what path we're on, see how drivers have changed across the state, what things are looking like, what path we might be on, make adjustments, be adaptive, and make the next set of actions. And hopefully, if we do things right, we may not be able to solve the 2050 problem today, but we can solve the near-term issues and then work to build on top of those to reach that future success and meet our water challenges. So that's another clear area that we're really seeing some opportunity to kind of, again, streamline, focus on this 5 to 7 year action effort, and really embracing those core values that are in the water plan. So there's 3 core values that are really fundamental and just spread across the entire water plan and really carry on to all our efforts. But the idea of supporting vibrant and sustainable cities, agriculture, recreation, tourism, having efficient and effective infrastructure, and then having healthy watersheds and streams and environment. Those concepts on top of, I think, that backdrop that Director Mitchell so articulately laid out of just recognizing that the roots of everything we do in the water world is really seemingly goes back to that 2002, 2003 period where we had big droughts, big fire. And of course, that is something, this fire, flood, drought cycle is something that we're living with and is certainly present today. And so as we think about those values and this kind of concept of needing to embed resilient planning, we see these 4 categories kind of emerging. So certainly we'll have all the context in the water plan. Things like scenario planning are so prominent that maybe now where they sit in chapter 6 needs to be elevated and moved up in some of that context setting. But then when we think about what we're going to do, it really breaks into four main categories for us that we're seeing. And these are all, I should point out, laid out on engagecwcb.org. You can go there now. We put up these information sheets that walk through a lot of what I'm kind of saying here, and hopefully it's something that you can respond to, that kind of break out into this kind of vision for the update, and then each of these areas. So one of those areas is vibrant communities. So all things municipal, industrial, just really supporting our cities and towns. And then robust agriculture. We know we need to really support robust and viable agriculture. Thriving watersheds, really looking at watersheds as an overarching umbrella term that can really encapsulate environment, recreation, healthy watersheds, and forest health as well, which is another huge topic that continues to be on people's minds. And then the last category is resilient planning. And that one is kind of an area where we see a lot of critical concepts that are important to the water plan update. So one of those being this idea of just adaptive management and how we plan to be more resilient. Understanding also that the core concepts of being adaptive and being resilient are kind of predicated on people being aware of those challenges, right? So we really need to embrace our education efforts and make sure that we are really making sure that all Coloradans are aware. And when I say all Coloradans, it's a nod to say that we also recognize that in this update, that we really need to really embrace equity, inclusivity issues, and double down on just recognizing that, yes, we're great at talking to the stakeholders we have, but we could probably do a better job just broadening that net and making sure that we're really getting input to and reaching all Coloradans. And then that last area in that kind of bucket of resilient planning we see is just the concept of smart government and supportive government that can help pave the way to make these actions possible, to help us create smart policy or refine policy and regulation where needed to kind of help pave this way forward that we see. So again, we really see those four buckets as being kind of central in creating this line of sight that lines out actions that are these near-term actions that have an eye towards what we need to achieve in the future, but really are the things that we can accomplish now. Understanding that all those areas, those objective areas, those big objective areas that were in the first water plan, you might remember the wheel with the kind of 9 areas and the 8 objective measures underneath them, but all those concepts of conservation, storage, land use, education, they're all cross-cutting themes that really float across these 4 buckets. We can't talk about cities and agriculture without talking about storage or conservation for that matter. We can't talk about thriving watersheds or cities without talking about education. So those cross-cutting themes, creating this line of sight, that's really where we're wanting to head in this update.
Well, thanks, Russ, for laying out your vision for that and describing those 4 different buckets. And that's a nice setup, I think, for the rest of this webinar this morning. We'll be getting into those 4 buckets and drawing out some of the emerging challenges that we need to address within those. But you also mentioned that we're going to have lots of actions. It's going to be very action focused. And that was true of the original water plan. There were lots and lots of actions there. But as we think about actions for the water plan update and implementing those actions, it occurs to me that we need to have a lot of collaboration to make sure that we're identifying the right actions, that we have good buy-in from stakeholders, and participation in those actions. And so I thought maybe I'd turn to you, Becky, and see how important you think it is that collaboration be incorporated into our actions and developing those actions in the water plan.
Thanks, Matt. And I think you touched on probably one of the most important issues that I see moving into the future is that willingness to collaborate across all the groups that we deal with. But I think we really learned that from the last water plan. When you heard Russ talk about the basin implementation plans, those were not part of the executive order. They came out of what we realized needed to happen. So it was really a start of that collaboration. That became the heart of the heart of Colorado's first ever water plan. And I think it was an example of collaboration and really from the grounds up level. So when you looked at it at a basin roundtable level and the development of that, and then really then pulling them all together into one big water plan, that was the start of collaboration. And we really realized as we developed that, more systems that we needed to collaborate with, whether it was the legislature or other groups that we hadn't really spent a lot of time with at that point. And so I think we're going to see an upwards trajectory of how we are including folks. And you heard Russ talk about the equity and inclusion, and diversity and inclusion. And I thought about that a lot these last few years, and especially since the last water plan came out. And we talk about the pluses and minuses of that last water plan. And I think we have to learn from our successes, but we also have to learn from our failures or things that we could have done better. And one of those things is really, how do we broaden that scope of collaboration? How do we speak outside just our typical water tent? How do we hear, not just speak to, but how do we hear from outside of our typical folks that are talking about water? And so I think we really see that as an important issue going forward. And I think we have so much to gain from looking at how things have been done, but we also have so much to gain from including folks that may have different ideas, and how do we merge that thought? So that to me is the heart of what collaboration looks like. It still will always go back to the basin roundtables and be in the heartbeat of the plan. And so we're hoping to broaden the tent there, but also broaden the tent in all of the work we do. We're hoping to get more legislators involved and passionate about this. We see it as incredibly important right now, as we're in this drought and we are presently sitting in this, that we are in a prime place for folks to be focused on a solution that may be different than the way that we have done it in the past.
Yeah. Thanks. You hit on an important point with the basin implementation plans being a sort of a central part of the water plan update. And that's definitely something that will be consistent with the update that was also included in the original water plan. I might switch gears a little bit. Russ mentioned that we have these 4 different areas of actions that we're going to be focused on: farms, cities, watersheds, and then resilience and people. And we're going to explore each one of those. I'll mention that CWCB staff are leading the water plan update. They play critical roles in implementing the water plan every day. They have a deep bench of expertise that they can pull from. But of course, the folks that are on this webinar today, the many stakeholders throughout the state who live and breathe water, we want to collaborate with those folks. So important, as Becky just mentioned. And so as we'll be hearing from CWCB staff about the different, those 4 buckets that Russ described earlier, I just want to again plug that engagecwcb.org website and reiterate what Russ said, that there are some fact sheets that are going to describe and sort of reiterate some of the things we talk about today. There's also that survey. Again, we're excited to hear from you. Where has the water plan been useful? What other areas does the water plan need to consider, and how could it be improved? Please provide your thoughts on that. So switching gears then, I thought maybe we could start with talking about watersheds, our sort of first bucket of actions. And as Russ mentioned earlier, when we talk about watersheds in the context of the water plan, we're thinking about environmental issues, and we're thinking about watershed health, and also recreation and forest health as a part of watershed health. You know, we've seen some of the biggest wildfires in recorded Colorado history this year. And so appropriately, you know, we're taking a more focused look at forest health this time around. And also with the pandemic, we've seen a lot of pressure on our recreational spots and resources in Colorado, which is great. We want people to experience Colorado. This is one of the best places in the country to live. But on the flip side of that, we can definitely see a lot of pressure and a lot of issues in our recreational areas. So we want to put more of a focus on that this time around. But Becky, if you could kick us off in this particular topic and share some of your thoughts, it'd be great on how important our streams, watersheds, and forests are to Colorado's future.
Thanks, Matt. And that's an important question. Nothing highlights the importance of the watersheds more than this summer. And as our watersheds face just a number of pressures, from competing water needs to climate stressed hydrology, those have cascading impacts for stream function, wildlife, aquatic species, forest health, and then coupled with those growing threats from climate related impacts and invasive species that increase recreational usage that you talked about, risk of drought, fire, and flooding further stress all those watersheds. So we know that that's going to have to be a critical part. The stream management plans provide a meaningful analysis and look at that. And so I think I can't mention that without mentioning funding, because there's no way to get that done without funding. And so we know that more is needed, especially as we look at this fire recovery time period that we're in. We know we have to focus on the forest health. So it is important to us. Watersheds and forest health are important as we look forward, not only from CWCB's perspective, but it should be important from folks across the state. I think you probably know, or most people on this call know, how important forest health is to the DNR director. And so we've definitely gotten some governmental support on a focus on that. And so I think we have to capitalize on the time that we're in right now. And folks are focused on kind of the recreational opportunities, or how forest fires can sometimes have an effect on that, especially now where folks are really using our outdoors as a way to kind of release from the pandemic. So we think about the wildfire season of 2020, and we have to figure out how to recover from that. And that needs to be a part of the water plan moving forward.
Well, that's a great introduction to this particular part of the webinar, and to dig into some of those items that you highlighted, Becky. We have Chris Sturm and Jojo Law with us, and Chris and Jojo, it'd be great to hear from you about some of the emerging challenges and some of the topics that Becky brought up. And maybe I'll start with you, Chris, if you could share some of your thoughts and vision for the water plan update.
Sure thing. Am I coming through all right, Matt? Good to hear. Well, good morning, everyone. I was looking through the list of participants, and there's a lot of names there I recognize, and I certainly miss seeing all of you in person. But I'm glad that you're here today. And welcome to my bungalow. I wish I was next to a river right now, but this is as good as it gets this morning. When I think about the vision for the water plan moving forward, I immediately went back in time to think about where we've been, because there's a lot of things to highlight on where we've been in the last 5 years or so that are still my vision moving forward. And so I thought I'd start by just going through some of the numbers with you guys. In the 6 grant cycles before the water plan was released for the watershed restoration program, the CWCB was able to fund 42 projects at just over 1.4 million. Since the water plan has been released, we've had another 6 grant cycles and have been increased the number of projects through 2 different funding sources 4 times. Have funded 163 different projects with over $17.5 million. So that's a 12-time increase in the amount of funding for the types of projects that we're doing in environment and rec. So we've certainly come a long way, and we've got ways to go with funding, but that's something to highlight because watershed health is important to all of us. Of course, I've been asked to speak about environment and recreation, but I would argue that many of the projects that we fund in the realm of watershed health have benefits to all of us and all of our water supply needs. I still hear that we need support for stakeholder groups and collaboration, and we hear this across all uses, across all sectors. And building collaborations takes time and it takes money, and it's never as easy as we'd like to think it is. And we've been adaptive to that in that our planning grants and our stream management, our integrated water management planning grants have been funded in a phased approach, and some of those have simply just funded the stakeholder process, the capacity building process. Of course, we want that to go to the development of good science and prioritization, and we're seeing many of those progress. In fact, we have been involved in nearly 24 different stream management or integrated watershed management plans. And so out of all of these projects, my vision for moving forward is really to highlight the tools that have come out of those efforts, the templates that have come out of those efforts, and the examples. And we've developed some wonderful tools, including the Fluvial Hazard Zone Mapping Program, in a partnership with the River Network, the Stream Management Plan, or coloradosmp.org website, which is a wealth of information that not only applies to just stream management planning, but certainly applies to watershed planning as well. And there's a lot of similarities between those. And as we look at the plans that have come out of that, you know, I said nearly 24, it's much more than just a number. And you have to look at the spatial extent of those plans. And we've seen absolutely wonderful representation in certain areas of the state with great coverage in the Upper Gunnison, in the Rio Grande, areas of the Southwest, tributaries to the Colorado, as well as many of our Front Range streams in the South Platte Basin. So we'd like to highlight some of those tools that have come out of those efforts, including the Colorado Stream Health Assessment Framework, which is rising as a very popular tool in our planning. Ultimately, we want this to lead to actions, and those actions are in the realm of protection or restoration. At a watershed scale, we often see a mix of a need for both, protecting what we like that's functioning well, and restoring what we think is not functioning as well as it could. When we look at this at a watershed scale, there's a need to implement across the entire landscape. It's usually not just one project that will address all of our concerns. To wrap this up, I'd like to say that I have a vision to really focus on our outcomes as much or more as we have been. There's varied levels of success in our implementation, which is the most important phase, in my opinion. And we're constantly striving to raise the bar on how we implement our projects and our planning efforts. And so with that, I think I will turn it over to JoJo for her comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, everybody. My name is JoJo, and I serve as the CWCB's Endangered Species Policy Specialist. Thank you so much for having me this morning. I have to say it's a tremendous privilege to be here this morning and to be able to actually work on what I consider one of the most important initiatives here in Colorado. I think we all have stories when we first worked on the original Colorado Water Plan in 2015. And I actually had the privilege of working on the original plan as a stakeholder, working on the non-consumptive portion of the water plan. And so now, as Chris said, as I'm looking at the attendee list and seeing the best and the brightest in the water, I think it's so humbling and actually a little ironic that I'm here to speak to you all today about the plan. But I think it truly highlights that no matter who you are or where you are, the plan affects you. And so I truly consider my job as being able to serve you all. So I'd love to hear from you all and what your expectations and goals are for the update. And I'd also like to build off what Chris started off with as well. But I think I'll start off with saying that the policy for watersheds of the state of Colorado has not changed for this update. And that is to continue to identify and implement environmental and recreational projects and methods. We still consider this a very high priority for the update, and we continue to lay the foundation for implementing these long-term goals. And I'm just going to quickly rattle off these 5 goals because of the importance. So number 1, recovery of endangered, threatened, and imperiled aquatic and riparian dependent species. Number 2, protect and enhance economic values that rely on environmental and recreational water uses. Number 3, support the development of multi-purpose projects and methods that benefit environmental and recreational water needs. Number 4, understand, protect, maintain, and improve conditions of streams, lakes, wetlands, and riparian. And last, number 5, maintain watershed health by protecting and restoring watersheds. And I mention and reiterate these policies because these goals are especially difficult during these times of increased drought. I would like to especially emphasize that as we face decreasing hydrology, increasing temperatures, and therefore risk of flood and fires, as Director Mitchell and Chris mentioned, we must consider that our watersheds will be the first to suffer with long-lasting effects. So I absolutely consider our jobs to work together to be able to address these emerging challenges. And that is the priority in the water plan update. So how do we begin to address these emerging challenges in the water update? This is where we need your help and your feedback, and building upon what we have already learned and already implemented. And as Chris highlighted, in the more than 5 years since the initial launch of the water plan, and based on the feedback that you guys have already given us, we at least have an idea of what our shared visions are for these long-term goals. So to start off with, I'd just like to highlight 3 potential actions in the information sheets. As Russ mentioned, they are online. And keep in mind, this is just a start, but I truly believe that this is a really good start. And we have very high expectations for ourselves and the state. And we also recognize that incremental change is necessary within our budget constraints, and also respecting that all basins are unique and site specific. So to start off with, number 1, climate change, climate change, climate change. And I think you'll hear this common theme of climate change throughout all staff as folks speak. But for thriving watersheds, we'd actually like to go beyond the flow tool. The flow tool does predict risk to environmental and critical recreational attributes in 2050, and it also includes those climate change scenarios. However, we have already heard feedback from you all that further evaluating impacts from climate change is really important. The second potential action I'd like to highlight is that we'd like to better understand what priority watershed means to all of you. So to be able to help stakeholders, we need to compile all the good work that has already been done over the more than 5 and more years. And we'd like to build off of the work that has already been accomplished. So we'd like to start with the focus area maps and compiling all of that information into GIS maps. And that includes what Chris had mentioned, stream management plans, integrated water management plans, and all of the environmental water plan efforts that have gone on. And this is really to give us an idea of the spatial coverage of all of the information that has been compiled. And we're not doing this alone, right? You all already have that information and you have already done this work. And we just like to bring all of that good information into one central database and map and build upon the good work of the focus area maps. So we are asking all roundtables and environmental and recreational subcommittees to help us better understand what each basin's priorities are. So we'll be following up with workshops and discussions, so please stay tuned. And the final thing I'd like to say is that we hope to build upon existing tools in our toolbox. And this is something that Chris especially highlighted. But that also includes the other environmental programs as well, including the recovery programs, in-stream flow programs, recreational projects, et cetera. Because we realize that each basin is different and unique, we need to have a different set of tools and more tools to be able to provide that common metric between the basins. So whether this is river health assessments or tools to help ensure projects are implemented on the ground, we want to hear from you. So the last thing I'll say is that I strongly believe that this is your water plan. So please let me know your thoughts and recommendations, and I look forward to hearing from you, and thanks for your time.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Chris and JoJo. I think you brought up all kinds of really detailed areas of where you're going to be focusing for the water plan update. I thought that was great. And Chris, thanks for providing some perspective on funding, which Becky highlighted as a big issue and still is a big issue, but we're making progress there. So I'd like to maybe turn back to Chris too and revisit forest health, since it's such an important issue right now. And certainly has been in the past, but is getting the big spotlight on it given what happened last year. And there are a lot of groups that are looking at forest health. There are a lot of studies out there, a lot of tools. But I was wondering, Chris, what are you seeing in the forest health space that you'd like to focus on for the water plan update?
Yeah, sure thing, Matt. Thanks. When I hear the term forest health these days from a lot of different stakeholders, you hear the word resiliency as well. And that's what we're looking for at a watershed scale. And forest health collaboration looks a lot like watershed collaboration in that it includes a lot of the same stakeholders and then adds our forestry community. And I would say it's incredibly important to engage our local government in this collaboration as well. So there is a very strong need moving forward to start collaborating our watershed health efforts with our forest health efforts. I think that we've been doing this to some extent for a while, but not at the scale that I'd like to see us doing as we move forward. And this is when forest health is where we really get into definitions of watershed health, and that it's a measure of ecosystem structure and function, and that's in the existing water plan. But the forests are structure, and changes in forests affect function, especially the hydrologic cycle, which is so incredibly important to us as water users and managers. And changes in that structure can have both short and long-term effects on hydrology. And so a vision there is to better understand what those are. And we're doing pretty well at understanding what those short-term effects are. And I think the update is going to get us further towards understanding what the longer-term effects on our hydrology can be, especially as we see more footprints burned around the state. So that's incredibly important. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about planning for forest health, though. I asked my son the other day what I thought was a pretty simple question, and he impressed me. I asked him when Noah started building the ark, and he looked at me and he said, "Before it started raining, Dad." And I was like, "Good answer, son," because a real vision of mine is to kind of get out of this business of chasing the disasters. Of course, we have to recover from disasters, but boy, if we can mitigate them on the front end, maybe the recovery isn't so onerous on the back end. And so the vision there is really to start identifying, and this has been done, but identifying areas that are likely to burn and bringing this into our water planning conversations. And then identifying where our critical water supplies are in those areas, where the overlap is. And when I say critical water supplies, it's all uses. We're talking about environment and recreation, of course, but we're talking about municipal, industrial, and agricultural as well. And then we need to identify strategies to mitigate impacts on those water supplies within those areas that are likely to burn. And this is probably the most important piece of it because it's going to take a multi-pronged approach that involves traditional forest health treatments along with watershed treatments. And ultimately, what we're trying to do here is adapt to climate change that includes fires, subsequent floods, and then, of course, drought. Once we identify those strategies, we all know that I'm a big proponent of employing them. Implementation is going to be incredibly important. And then on the back end, monitoring to see how well we're doing, because we're going to continue to have fires. But if we have fires in areas where we've done this landscape scale or watershed scale approach to employing strategies, and then we monitor and compare that to other areas where we haven't had opportunities to do mitigation up front, we can get an idea how well our strategies are working. So thank you, Matt.
Great. No, thank you, Chris. And actually, that's a nice, you're setting the stage nicely for the next topic, which is vibrant communities. You know, we know that cities and towns rely on clean supplies that come from our watersheds. And it really sort of highlights the fact that, you know, so many of these different sectors of water use are interrelated. As we think about now and maybe turn our attention towards water use in cities and by industry, you know, as we've been talking with folks in basins and other stakeholders, we've been hearing a lot about conservation and the need to use water wisely. And we've also been hearing about our need for storage. And to launch us on this particular topic, you know, how the water plan can support vibrant communities, I'll turn back to Becky, and would you mind sharing some of your thoughts on municipal and industrial water uses and the role of conservation and storage?
Well, and the importance of really vibrant communities, vibrant and robust communities, is got to be a focus of the Basin Roundtables and the Interbasin Compact Committee, and one of those things that we're all going to have to grapple with. How do we create that and make sure we're making that better? And so, as these communities are focusing are facing these supply challenges both today and I expect that it's going to continue in the future. I can't stop talking about the drought hole that we are in. One event is not going to help us get out of that. But as we look to the future and as we're all looking to the future together, and we look at the uncertainties that are population growth and those future supplies, industries are confronted with that and looking at how do we address the availability of water supply and sustain and expand their operations. So we're obviously going to be focusing on that. We know that vibrant cities are a critical driver to economic growth, and the importance of that is extremely highlighted right now as we look at getting out of the situation that we're in, both on the water supply side, but the economic drought that we're in. And so these vibrant cities are important. And they're important for that, but they're also important on the mental health side. So as we look at our cities, there has to be a value placed on green spaces, tree canopies, urban waterways. They serve multiple purposes. Besides just mitigating heat and cleaning pollutants and reducing flood risk, local food production, but they also are supporting existing nature, but our health of our community. So, I mean, when we think about cities, we think about oftentimes cities on the Front Range, but we need to be thinking about urban communities across Colorado, not just Front Range communities. When we talk about vibrant communities, it is all communities. It is Main Street everywhere and all across Colorado. So we need to continue thinking about that. And I think that's one of the areas where the Basin Roundtables and the Interbasin Compact Committee are going to have to play a heavy role, because nobody knows their communities like those folks that are on the ground in those areas. So sometimes in some cases, the only opportunity for our fellow Coloradans to engage with the water and outdoors is in their near communities. So maintaining those landscapes and livable areas is important, both for resiliency, but also from a perspective of equity, and making sure that all folks have opportunity to enjoy their areas. Conservation is a critical piece to that puzzle, and I thank you for bringing that up, Matt, but you cannot uncouple that with storage. That's how we have the flexibility to conserve and use it in times of need. So we cannot think about those things separately. We have to think about those things coupled as we think about sustaining our vibrant communities. So thank you for those questions, Matt.
No, and thanks for the responses and putting in perspective, making sure that our communities are livable and, healthy for the folks that live there. But also balancing that with wise water use and conservation. So I appreciate your perspectives on that. And we have a couple of folks, a couple of CWCB staff that are thinking about the areas of conservation and storage, and we have them with us today. I'll ask Kevin Reedy and Anna Moss to join the conversation, and maybe start with Kevin. And could you offer some thoughts on the emerging issues, the areas where you're really focused for the water plan update?
Sure thing, Matt. Thanks a lot. I'm Kevin Reedy. I'm with the Colorado Water Conservation Board, obviously, but I'm the state water conservation specialist, and been doing this for a little over 10 years now at the CWCB. Have seen a lot of changes. Been in the field since 2002, since the drought, so which was a huge drought hole back then. Got me thinking about all this stuff today, and I've got some points I want to touch on. But first, I want to talk about like a little analogy, and bear with me because this is an interesting one. I think I came up with this today. This is for all you vinyl heads out there who listen to records still. Bands start out with the first album, right? Their freshman album, and they hit it big, and they come out of the gates roaring. I look at the first water plan version as the freshman album, right? So now we're heading into the sophomore album. This could be tricky, right? You could have a sophomore slump, or you could really take off with it. And the difference with that is the band creates a lot of material for that second album, and they really work hard at it. And I feel that we've really created a lot of material over the last 5 years in doing these things. And, a lot of good projects, a lot of great efforts, a lot of advances in what I'm going to be talking about today: water efficiency, land use, and reuse and alternative water sources, among other things, as Chris had laid out with stream management plans as well. So we've created a lot of materials. And how do you do that, right, with this setup? Well, we had to do it with partners. We've really been working hard to create a lot of partnerships over the last 5 years and before that. And I think it's very important to recognize that without that, we couldn't have gotten as far as we have done, and especially along with funding as well. But I think it's really important to recognize partnerships in this. And I think I'm really confident that our sophomore album, the second water plan, is going to be a big success. And I think we've got a lot of material to work with, and we can really use it as a springboard to go. So I'll just start off with that, saying that, the last water plan, and I worked on the water efficiency and land use and reuse sections, right? And if you've read those sections, it's not as maybe integrated as it could be. And so it was our first time out doing this. And so, laying out those efforts, was a effort in itself, right? But so this time around, really looking at how do we, integrate these things better? How do we look at urban water management in a more holistic, sustainable manner, right? And seeing how these things interact. And just as Chris and Jojo were talking about as well, there are a lot of connections between this, about urban water management and agricultural water and forest health, things like that. So really looking at integrating planning a lot more this time, and really continuing on the incentives and technical assistance approach, which is very, very, really, really important here in the state of Colorado, since we are very big on local control. and looking at the interdisciplinary nature of land use, water efficiency, and alternative water sources. So with that, kind of moving through some of these ideas, looking at, you can't look at these things in a vacuum or by themselves in a silo. You've got to really look at these things together. And looking at the next generation of water efficiency tools, really looking at technology to really help push this stuff, and also administrative things like water budgets, right? Looking at how we can really promote water budgets across all water utilities in the state. I think that's going to be a really important step to take to really help manage day-to-day operations, but also when you get into a drought, I think they're really important to do that. And it gets you more in tune with what your actual demands are. I want to be really looking at climate resilient landscapes and efficient outdoor irrigation as a much bigger part of this discussion going forward. It's a must. We need to do this in order to manage urban water better. And we need to, be looking at the right landscape for the right place. In addition to that, really looking at systems, right? And distribution systems in particular. Looking at water loss in these systems. We're getting ready to kick off phase 2 of the Colorado Water Loss Initiative. If you haven't heard about it, we can put some links up there for you guys. And we had a large number of utilities go through it for the first phase, and they found it was really amazing what they found in their own water distribution systems. A lot of them didn't know that they had these problems. It's a really forensic way to go through your water distribution system. So we're really continuing that. And that will probably tie in with what Anna may be talking about too, is with infrastructure issues and water loss in systems, as part of what you're talking about. This is a really big issue. We've got a lot of infrastructure problems now in the United States, but Colorado as well. And I think this is one of those first steps that we can take to kind of head off worse problems and really kind of, retain that revenue and get some water back in your systems. Then we move on to water reuse and alternative water sources. We've had a lot of good success creating regulations for direct potable reuse since the last water plan. We called it out pretty prominently in the last plan. We've gotten so far as to basically get ready for rulemaking to begin pretty soon. And that will be CDPHE taking on that. And we're hoping that happens in the next couple of years. But that's something that we've really made a lot of progress on. And it's needed because we didn't have any regulations for that. And if somebody wants to do it, then now they're going to be able to do it with confidence. But also, promoting site scale water reuse. I really like to think of Denver Water's new campus as a really vanguard of that. As soon as they can have people moving back into that campus, after COVID goes away, they're going to really be showcasing a lot of these things. But looking at gray water systems and rainwater harvesting, and really looking at building codes and other land use codes to promote these things on a larger scale. We've only got, I think, 3 or 4 cities and counties that have adopted gray water ordinances, for example. And I think this could be a large portion, a big solution for larger buildings and maybe more community living. And then we'll move on to land use. Been working a lot on this, integrating water efficiency into land use planning. And I think it's one of those things that we need to do, and I'll talk a little bit more in a few minutes. But I think one of the I don't know, what do you want to call it? One of the things that we want to be doing in the coming years is really looking at water demand differently and how we estimate it. We use GPCD and per person usage, and that's great, and that can get you to a place, with population. But what a number of people are really looking at land use types and zoning classifications to quantify land use or water use in that land use. And I think if you look at both of these between the GPCD and this type of thing, I think you get a much better picture. Westminster's doing a lot of this, as well as some special districts up around Fort Collins. There's some work that we've helped fund that is looking into this and how do you do that. There's some new work coming out of Babbitt Center in Arizona, teamed up with UC Denver to look at the Aurora Water Service Area. And they're going to be publishing this pretty soon, but they've come up with some really interesting projections based on land use going out into new developed areas and saying, well, this is kind of between the landscape and the form that we're looking at, this is the kind of demand we should be looking at. And then if you do X, Y, and Z, you can reduce that demand. So I think those are really essential things we need to be looking at. It's much more sophisticated, I think, and I think you can get a much better viewpoint of what your demand would be. And of course, this obviously ties back in with the water efficiency stuff that we've been talking about. And also, continuing training and technical assistance throughout Colorado for land use integration. Growing Water Smart is a program that's the Sonora Institute has come up with, and we've helped fund this with a number of other partners. It's a really great kind of a boot camp to get water planners, land use planners, and elected officials, which is really important. I think elected officials are the key there because they can actually make things happen when you get back to your office, right? But they come out of there with an action plan on how they're going to do that. We've had a lot of success. I think we've had about close to 30 communities, either towns, cities, or counties go through this. And there's been a lot of advancement on that side with these teams going out there. And additionally, one overlooked kind of group that we haven't really touched on is developers. We've been working with the public sector a lot on this stuff, but developers are in the private sector, and they're dealing with a bunch of different constraints and different viewpoints and different goals. So we need to be looking at them, bringing them into the fold as well, to really be examining how we're building water conscious communities in the future. To be honest, every development and redevelopment we do should be water conscious. We should be looking at water in depth into how we treat water in those new communities, and to be more resilient in the face of climate change. And with that, talking about that is, water adequacy, water budgets and new developments. Sterling Ranch is a great example. They've been tracking demands in all their new development from the beginning. And I really want to see that in all new developments, that they are looking at what the demand is, not just the supply that they need to theoretically control this, or to supply the water to this new development. We should be looking on the demand side as well. So I think with all that said, how do we integrate this stuff? And I think we need to be linking urban water efficiency into urban food production, climate resilience, stormwater management, green building. But really looking at, I'm examining this now, been working on a one water plan with the city and county in Denver recently. And I'm thinking that this might be a good way to frame this whole discussion, because one water kind of really helps bring in alternative water sources, land use planning, and water efficiency into the mix together in a pretty good way. And I think we'll be looking at that and how to frame this in the future. And really the idea behind all this is to really make a more resilient urban communities, more resilient to climate change. If you do this stuff up ahead of time, long-term water conservation, water efficiency, and these kind of things can really help you, not even fall into a big drought hole, but have a smaller drought hole to fall into if you need to do that. So that's kind of where we're at now. We've got a lot of ways to go, but I think we're on a good track, and I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of our partners on how we can improve this second sophomore album that we're going through, and really make it the best we can. So I think that's all I got. So I'll turn it back over to you, Matt.
Well, thanks, Kevin. I appreciate that analogy. Growing up in the 80s, big fan of hair bands. I sort of have this mental image of the water plan in that context, which is a little silly. But anyway, so you touched on a lot of good topics there. Certainly collaboration in working through some of these really interesting things that you brought up, but you also touched on integration and how different areas integrate, and certainly storage and conservation are integrated issues. If you save water, you need a place to keep it so that it's available during drier times. And so I'd like to turn to Anna. I know you've been thinking a lot about storage, and I was wondering if you could share a few thoughts on the importance of storage and how the CWCB supports storage.
Absolutely. Thanks, Matt. And for those who don't know me, my name is Anna Moss. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at the CWCB. And as Matt mentioned, the storage goal in the original water plan was really complementary with the conservation goal. So this was to try to attain 400,000 acre feet of storage. And I looked back kind of similar to what Chris did in preparing for today, is that since the water plan was developed, I looked through what we've funded. And so between preserving, restoring, and creating new acre feet, we're at 270,000. This does include what we've preserved and restored, not just new, so it's not directly correlated with that goal, but still a really impressive accomplishment. This was done through the support of 24 water plan grants that totaled $9.9 million. And those grants are often coupled with our water project loan program. And so I looked back at those numbers also. And during that same time period, we executed 22 contracts for storage projects for a total of $88 million. And something that's interesting to note is that we also did award a $90 million loan for the Windy Gap firming project. This number actually doesn't get rolled into those previous numbers I mentioned. But that project is really the primary part of that project is the Chimney Hollow Reservoir, which is a 90,000 acre foot new storage reservoir that will ultimately support or supply about 30,000 acre feet. And it's a great project in the sense that it's really collaborative. It's 12 different water providers. And it's collaborative not only on the providers front, but also on the funding side. It's got a water revenue bond, plus the CWCB loan. So these projects get a lot of attention because they're big numbers, it's a big splash. But really those small storage projects, I think, are what we're going to continue to work with as we look forward and to the progress we're making currently, and then as we look to the next iteration of the water plan. You know, the big projects they're complicated. They often have a lot of complexities. They can be hard to get off the ground. So they're just fewer and far between. But the small projects can still have a very significant impact on the goals we're trying to achieve. So looking forward, you know, I guess I'm expecting again to see a lot of these smaller projects that we will continue to support. I think that a lot of our support will probably be on the financial side. We do have a lot of great funding programs. I know we've talked a little bit today about some of those financial challenges with infrastructure projects. But some of the programs that we have that are ongoing are our feasibility study grant program. We've got water plan grants. We've got the Water Supply Reserve Fund grant program, although currently a little limited in funding there. Then we've got our water project loan program. And then beyond that, there are, you know, there's federal sources, there's the revenue bonds. Some of the local water districts also have funding opportunities. So back to that theme, I think I've heard the word collaboration today mentioned many times. It's not only on the project front, but really on the financial side of things too. We can certainly look to collaborate, and we love to do that as we're looking at projects. So I guess kind of in closing, you know, it's been a little bit of a tough year as we've seen a lot of our funds redirected towards pandemic efforts. And that's totally understood. It's been an interesting time for everybody out there. But really, I do feel very optimistic about the future, especially as we look, you know, this near-term planning horizon, but really the long-term goals of the water plan also. So. Thanks, Matt.
All right. No, thank you very much. And thanks for sharing some of the great progress that we've made as a state in getting some new storage online and the support that the CWCB provides for that. I mean, storage is such an important part of how we address our water challenges in Colorado. And you know, chief among them is moving water to where it's needed and when it's needed. And that's going to be a continuing challenge in the future as we see changes in water availability due to increased demand or potential changes in hydrology from shifts in our climate. And so certainly an area that we'll need to continue focusing on in the future. So thanks very much. Let's shift to our next topic then, and that is how the water plan can help foster robust agriculture. You know, ag faces a number of different challenges, you know, year in and year out related to markets for their goods, production costs, water supply challenges, buy and dry pressure, extreme weather events. But it's such a vital part of our economy and our culture. And I was wondering, Becky, if you could share some of your thoughts on the importance of agriculture in Colorado.
Sure. In this, thank you, Matt. And I think agriculture is definitely a focus. And I think as we think about that moving forward, we have to think about this isn't new. When we think about why the IBCC was created and the Basin Roundtables, one of the main issues that were looked at was the concern over the alarming rate of buy and dry. And so we were I think one of the purposes was really to say, okay, that doesn't embrace the value structure of what Colorado is and how we want to move towards the future. We know the folks in the agricultural sector are no stranger to dealing with challenges. They are experts. They're trying to run profitable enterprises at the same time of dealing with the things that you mentioned: climate change, drought, extreme weather events, that pressure from buy and dry. At the same time, aging infrastructure, and how do we deal with that? And so looking forward, we cannot forget the importance of agriculture. There are benefits of agriculture that we need to make sure that we highlight. The ecosystem benefits from irrigated agricultural return flows cannot be ignored. And this year has even highlighted more kind of that the food supply chains and how critical those are to our safety and security. And first we look in our state for that, but and across the nation, we see that as an incredibly important issue. So that's happened at the same summer that we're dealing with drought. And so I think we're going to have to look at that and how do we address that in the water plan, and making sure that it's not just about ATMs. They are important. And in the original water plan, they were framed as part of agriculture, but they really typically provide a benefit to municipal industrial industry. And so I think we need to reshape that discussion in this sophomore water plan, and make sure that we look at the whole picture and really focus on the importance of agriculture, and get back to the Interbasin Compact Committee and the Basin Roundtables purpose and mission as it related to agriculture. And I think I'm excited about this topic in the water plan. And I think one of the reasons I am so excited is because there is an incredible focus on agriculture right now and its role in the state, especially with pandemic and drought in the background. So thanks for bringing this topic up.
Yeah, you bet. And you touched on a couple of things that we've heard from a number of basins. I know a lot of basins are really interested in telling that story, and kind of back to the theme of integration, how agriculture, how irrigated ag can benefit ecosystem services, and that interrelationship there, and maybe something that people don't often think of, but is certainly a benefit that we recognize and want to talk a little bit more about. So I'd like to bring Alex Funk and Megan Holcomb into the discussion here. I know Alex and Megan have been thinking quite a bit about some of the emerging issues, some of the uncertainties facing agriculture, and have a vision for how they want to address those things in the water plan. And we'll start with Alex. Take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. And hello to the attendees today. Exciting to see so many folks. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Alex Funk, and I'm the CWCB's Agricultural Water Resources Specialist. So many others have touched on this today, but I think the theme that we're hearing a lot so far, particularly for the agriculture and food sector in Colorado, heading into the water plan update, will be that of cascading risk. So in 2020, Colorado's farmers and ranchers faced many challenges stacked on top of each other. The impacts of COVID-19 had a tremendous impact on our food systems, coupled with one of the most intense droughts. And Megan Holcomb will touch on this gaping drought hole situation in more detail. There also have been wildfire impacts, which have raised significant portions of summer grazing land throughout Colorado. The impacts of these events will continue this year and beyond. I make this point because farmers and ranchers are adaptable. They have withstood significant drought and other disasters before. As water resources decline, they adapt. I think the concern, though, is that cascading risks caused by a changing climate can make adaptation significantly more challenging. Therefore, I think the Colorado Water Plan update, with the help of the water community, will need to focus on identifying strategies and actions that bolster resilience in multiple ways. So based on initial scoping with the agriculture community, I think there will be a significant focus on how to support both resilient agriculture production and food systems and rural communities simultaneously in the face of climate change and other water resource challenges, such as declining water availability, particularly in groundwater dependent areas of the state. Despite these cascading risks, the update is an opportunity to hopefully highlight stories of farmers and ranchers proactively taking on these challenges. For example, in southwestern Colorado, the Montezuma Orchard Restoration Project is leading an effort to restore heritage apple orchards as an effort to conserve water through the transition of forage to orchard production while developing a value-added operation for the region. In the lower Gunnison, ditch companies and producers are working to modernize their irrigation infrastructure to address water quality issues such as salinity and selenium, benefiting water users and endangered fish species. In the Eastern Plains, where the Ogallala Aquifer is a vital but declining resource, groundwater management districts and producers are banding together through the Colorado Master Irrigator Program, a peer-to-peer networking program that is encouraging producers to adopt water conservation practices that will benefit their communities and bottom lines. In Longmont, Jack's Solar Garden is looking at the opportunities around agrivoltaic systems, which is essentially the co-siting of solar production with irrigated agriculture, which shows some promise in terms of conserving water, improving yields, and providing a new revenue stream for producers. And then finally, in Kremlin, Colorado, a ranching community is collaboratively working with conservation organizations, the Colorado River Basin Roundtable, and researchers to assess the potential opportunities for conserving water to meet water needs for the environment, recreation, and other water users while sustaining viable agriculture. I'll close with 2 points. These stories give me hope, and I'm excited to share them in the update, while discussing actions that can help scale similar and new efforts to address cascading risk. Another significant goal of the update will be to highlight the diversity of agriculture in our state. Particularly in light of Director Gibbs' announcement on Monday of the formation of a water equity task force, I'm hoping that there will be thoughtful, inclusive engagement with ag stakeholders that have historically been underrepresented in conversations around water management. Urban farmers, acequias, others deserve the same opportunity to participate in water resource discussions. I, for one, am eager to work with the task force to better understand how to more effectively engage these communities in the update process. And with that, welcome any and all feedback from stakeholders engaged on ag and food system issues in Colorado. You all are more than welcome to reach out to me and CWCB staff to share your thoughts and inputs. Also, definitely want to plug an upcoming series of workshops on ag water management issues coming in the next few months. Check out the Engage CWCB website for details. Thanks, Matt.
Thanks, Alex. Matt, do you want me to jump in, or?
Yeah, go right ahead, please. Yeah,
okay.
Go for it.
Awesome. I have some thoughts that are a bit of an echo of many things that our staff and Becky have already mentioned, but just driving home that when drought conditions do creep into our state, our agricultural communities are really the frontline workers. Deeply connected to ecosystem conditions and the residual impacts of past droughts, producers largely bear the brunt of our drying landscape. And when the 2020 drought set in, the Agricultural Impact Task Force was the first group activated by the state drought plan. This coalition of state, federal, and agricultural association partners are, in a lot of ways, I consider ambassadors of adaptation. They are men and women whose livelihoods are directly affected by a changing climate, and the first to recommend adaptive agricultural priorities and creative investments for more drought resilient operations or even alternative revenue streams. So there are certainly positive pressures that a multi-year drought like the one we're in now reveals to our many water-dependent economies in the state. Multi-year and more frequent drought episodes reveal quite quickly where our unsustainable dependencies lie and how regenerative practices might demonstrate real resilience to neighbors, practices that can bridge farm operations across the driest years. So it's worth recalling that Colorado's last large drought hole was just yesterday in 2018. The National Drought Monitor indicated that we came out of that episode in May 2019, which means that the current drought cycle was set in less than 1 year later. And no one knows this more than our agricultural communities. They feel that drought impacted landscape, and certainly their impacted business finances, which don't simply balance out after a few good precipitation months. So what Alex referred to as cascading risks is this essential concept in climate and ecosystem science that defines what many are calling the new normal. So the idea that hazard episodes like flood, drought, and wildfire, and even disease will happen more frequently and with greater intensity. So this is the big picture of what we as citizens, businesses, and certainly youth are pushing to build resilience to. We are definitely at a point in time where this pattern is not a reason for fear, shock, or surprise. As water practitioners, scientists, and leaders in our various communities, we have both the opportunity and I believe the duty to choose our language carefully and intentionally. We need to lead with language that, language and actions really, that help change resistant humans, which we all are to varying degrees, really embrace culture and ecosystem shifts so that we feel empowered to adapt together. We can recognize that we're not all gonna feel the heavy pressure of drought or the inspiration of action at the exact same time, but I read the water plan cover to cover before interviewing for the CWCB 5 years ago. I was like a proper water weirdo, really giddy about it. It was certainly more forward thinking than the states I was working with at the time. And updating the plan in the midst of a pandemic and extended drought, and after a massive wildfire season again, is also an opportunity for perspective and really setting a stronger vision than we have even articulated in the first plan. It's a reminder that the future we want may take a lot of activation energy, but it's actually quite similar across the board. We all want reliable ways to support our families, to feed our citizens, and maintain the aspects of both rural and urban life that bring us joy and adventure, purpose and security. And I think these fundamental values are much deeper than crop types or car dependencies. So my takeaway is that I'm pretty confident Coloradans have this vision for adaptation and really have a vision for setting big action steps that we can and will follow through with because we have to. So thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, and from one water weirdo to another, thank you, Megan and Alex, for your good work in this area, your great thoughts. We talked a lot about, some activities that are going on in different basins. Thanks, Alex, for mentioning that. Some common themes that we've talked about, throughout the discussion this morning in terms of collaboration, talking with a lot of different folks, and also starting to think about things maybe in some different ways than we have in the past. So really appreciate your thoughts there. And I think I'll move us now to our last bucket, as Russ had talked about and described our action areas before, and that's of resilient planning. We've seen a lot of interest in topics like resilience, adaptation, inclusivity, and we've heard a lot about that this morning as we've talked with staff about their vision for the water plan update. So Becky, I'd like to ask you some specific questions in this particular area and kind of break it down into 4 different pieces that were really, I think, in the original water plan aggregated under what we called other, and I'm using air quotes for that, other objective measures, which didn't, I don't think, diminish their importance, but they were sort of grouped into one area, and we'd like to maybe pull some of those out and talk about them a little bit more specifically in the water plan update. And I think Megan gave us a really good jumping off spot to talk about something that we need to address in the water plan, and that's being adaptive. The prior water plan talked about adaptive management. It provided 5 future plausible scenarios that may impact us in the future. And we did the technical update to the water plan and ran our numbers against those 5 future scenarios. And it really gave us an appreciation for what we may see in a warmer future and how that might affect our water supplies. And of course, the future is uncertain. And I know the CWCB, and I'm thinking about the FACE hazards tool. The CWCB is invested in tools that help us understand the costs of doing nothing or the costs of not being adaptive to those future conditions with respect to flood, fire, and drought. So again, a big topic, but I was wondering if you could share a few thoughts on how important it is for the water plan to discuss adaptive planning.
Well, thanks, Matt. And I think you touched on something really important. The future is uncertain, and that was where the scenario planning came about. It is really adaptive planning, but when we talk about resiliency, resilient planning must include that increased adaptive planning. And so as we see the climate warming and those impacts are being increasingly felt across our communities, and as the hydrology shift and we have more extreme weather events, we're going to have to be adaptive in how we respond to that. But one of the things to remember is that oftentimes those impacts are disproportionately felt in some of our poorest communities, those communities that have the fewest resources to respond and adapt. And I heard Megan talk about our agriculture sector being first line of defense, but it's also those communities that are going to have to figure out how to respond and adapt. And so I think understanding and supporting these adaptation measures that mitigate risk and then maximize benefits and promoting and putting forward projects that support all Coloradans is especially critical as we're in the next phase of the water plan.
Yeah, very good points. Very good points. And one thing that occurs to me is that a big challenge in being adaptive is just to understand what those challenges are, understand what the future may look like, and the kinds of things that will have to happen in order for us to meet those future challenges, and our ability to be flexible and just being aware of all these things. And so how important is it for our stakeholders and the broader public to be aware of our major water issues, and how can we make them more aware?
Well, and I'm going to say something about kind of what you just said. And I think it's important that we look at education as a two-way street, not just an education from us to stakeholders across the state. I think when we talk about education, it's important with everything that we do, but it goes both ways. And so it is definitely been highlighted as something that needs to be a focus across our agency. And we have made sure to kind of shift the way that we were doing things based on that. But with that purpose of getting messages out, but also receiving messages back in. Part of the engagecwcb.org is that's the purpose of that, is that we learn and can get that information back out. And so when we talk about how we're investing our money, it is only as good as it lives on. So when we talk about projects that happen in smaller communities, those are good for those communities, but can we take those lessons learned that happened on the ground and share them? And so I think that's a lot what our role is. And so key to that is PEPO, the Public public education and participation and outreach group that's part of the Interbasin Compact Committee. And so we're trying to create a stronger link between that and the Basin Roundtables so that the education two-way street is flowing as quickly as possible. And then we have to make sure that we continue our partnerships with groups like Water Education Colorado, and then capitalize on Water Year 2022. There are so many anniversaries that happen next year. It is the 100th anniversary of the Colorado River Compact. CWCB will be having a birthday. Colorado River District will be having a birthday. There's a lot that is significant about the year 2022. And I think we have to look to the past, what we've learned from the past, and get those messages out and use that two-way street as much as possible.
Yeah. Education is so important. And I really like your perspective on education being a two-way street. And that's really a great lead in to the next aspect of resilient planning. And that's having supportive government, supportive policies. As we need to be more resilient in the future, we need to be more adaptive. You know, we need to think about the barriers to being adaptive and removing or smoothing those barriers over, and having supportive policies and agencies kind of to this two-way street that partner with stakeholders to address these challenges. And maybe that's through legislation or regulations or policies or executive orders. And I was wondering if you could share some areas where you have seen or you're seeing government agencies taking a leadership role in this area.
Thanks for this question, Matt. I was thinking about it a lot last night. And, you know, sometimes I just sit and think about the water plan and the future and the past. And I think one of the things I am most proud of is some of the work that we've done on the permitting within the state of Colorado. And so, and really how we have focused on streamlining permitting and supporting some regulatory change for emerging technologies and legislation that removes barriers that protect Colorado's water, but also people's access to it. And I think one of the major successes we've had is the relationships with folks that are trying to get projects permitted. And I think about the difference of where we were 10 years ago versus where we are today. And it goes back to that two-way education street. I think where we were 10 years ago was trying to say, okay, we need to communicate with our project permitters. And as I was thinking about this last night, I thought about how much we have shifted and how much we have changed within the state. And the project permitters are really been focused on, okay, how do we work with the state? And it's really opened that two lines of communication and have started seeing the state as a helpful part of the process moving forward. So we created kind of the Go By Blue Book. And as I was thinking about this last night, I thought about you know, my interaction with other states and have heard some of their challenges. And one of the statements that I make to them most frequently of where our biggest success has been is this, and it's kind of a quiet success. It's happened over time where those lines of communication have opened up, but that takes incredible amount of support from the government. When projects take 20 years, that costs money, and that costs money to the people in the state of Colorado. That has an impact on all of us. And so we have to find ways to make sure good projects get through and they go through all of the analysis that needs to happen, but they're as efficient as possible. I think another way that the government has really try to support is that when we see an issue that stakeholders are saying this is of concern, we try to step up. And another example of that is the anti-speculation work group. And that's really when we're looking at speculation and private investment in water. It is a growing concern across the state. And so the state has said, okay, let's convene water experts, policymakers, and other Coloradans that are looking at ways to address this, both within some of the work that we're doing in the Water Conservation Board and on the ground with demand management feasibility investigation. But that anti-speculation law work group, that's part of that also, is focusing on it. I think those examples are good examples, but are just a start. And so we need to continue to find ways that we can support the good work that is happening on the ground. Proposition DD is another good example. That really says, okay, the people have supported this. We're starting to see a focus on water, and people are starting to hear that this is important. It's important to all Coloradans. And so that promoted the development of the Colorado Water Plan grants. And we couldn't have done that without supportive government. And that was really the legislature. So I can't thank them enough for that. The legislature heard that this was important, and they heard it at a time where there were demands for education and healthcare, and now we're in a pandemic, and they still heard that this is important to the value structure of Colorado. I think we could go on with examples, and I don't want to talk about the examples as much as I want to talk about we need more examples. We need more in the future, and we will continue to work with everyone in all levels of government to make sure that that occurs.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you very much for those thoughts, and it really sort of highlights some other areas of integration. And for example, Prop DD, raising awareness, in the public about the importance of water issues, and also appreciate you providing some perspectives on permitting, which was a big focus of the original water plan. Made some progress, certainly more to do there, but again, thank you for your perspectives on that. And the fourth area of resilient planning that I'd like to ask you about is that of inclusivity. And I know that staff and you have been really wanting to make sure that we work hard to coordinate with all Coloradans and think about the diverse opinions from across the state, and be inclusive and to talk to a wide variety of folks. And so I'd like if you could just take a minute or two and talk about how important it is that we work to be more inclusive in our efforts.
And thanks, that is definitely a passion of mine. And I think our goal needs to be not to close the tent, close the doors, but really expand the tent as much as we can and get different ideas. You've heard me talk about this, Matt, about if we want a different way to look at things, or if we want different solutions, we're going to have to ask different people. But we cannot forget that grassroots water planning has been the hallmark of Colorado's water plan, and the roundtables and the Interbasin Compact Committee are the heart of that. And so how do we get more people engaged in that? How do we get more people engaged in other things that we're doing, these work groups and things like that? And so as we strive for greater levels of inclusivity, we're going to have to look at different sectors. We're going to have to look for different cultural perspectives. And so our role is really to support that and open those lines of communication, open the doors to the tent, and continue to get those new and different ideas. We are working in an unprecedented way with our tribes, and that has been an incredibly eye-opening experience for me, seeing some of what they're they're dealing with within our state, and clean water issues, and things like that that we're often not thinking about. But this pandemic has definitely highlighted it. So we also, you may have heard, if you listened into our board meeting over the last couple days, we've DNR Director Dan Gibbs announced our equity task force. And so we're specifically looking at that for the water sector. And so there'll be some more news on that, and really looking at that as a way to expand the tent. And so we have this collaboration that we continue to talk about has to be coupled with equal access to our funding opportunities and our grant programs. We have to make sure that folks across the state know what's available to them and how to use it and help them.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much. Yeah, a very important topic, and one that is certainly getting a lot of emphasis as we move forward, that of inclusivity on the water plan update. And I'll say that's what we had on our agenda for today. And thank you very much, Director Mitchell. Thank you to the CWCB staff for sharing your vision for the water plan update. Huge thanks to the folks that tuned in and hung with this presentation to the end. I'll remind folks that you can go to engagecwcb.org. It has, as Russ mentioned, some fact sheets that summarize the topics we talked about today. Again, there's a survey there that you can fill out to provide thoughts on where the water plan could be strengthened, where it is strong, and how it's been of good use to you, and what are some of the emerging issues that we need to be focused on as we update the water plan. I'll mention that there are going to be some additional opportunities to hear about the direction of the water plan, to provide your input between now and June. And then once we get into July, CWCB staff will be working on that update. And there will absolutely be opportunities to comment on draft versions of the water plan before it's finalized near the end of 2022. So in the spirit of being efficient and streamlined, as Russ mentioned at the kickoff of our webinar, we have a little bit of extra time here. I was wondering, Becky, if you'd like to offer any final thoughts before we close out this webinar for the day.
I think the final thoughts that I would add is that to remember the strength and the greatness that was the first water plan was really based on the foundation of all the comments that were received. You've probably heard me say this on multiple occasions, but we got 30,000 comments, and so on that first ever Colorado water plan. And so we're hopeful that events like today, everything else that we've planned, will create more of that strength, and that it is a two-way street. I know this one is difficult, but we have, you can make sure we go on engagecwcb.org, get your comments in. Let's open the lines of communication and build on that strength that we've had. I also have to thank all of the groups that have been involved, especially the Basin Roundtables, especially the IBCC, the NGOs, our municipal partners, the legislature. There are so many people, too many people to thank, because we pull together the thoughts and ideas that come from those groups. So this water plan is really the water plan of the people, by the people, for the people. We just try to pull the ideas together. And so it isn't possible without that input. And so we continue to hear good thoughts from the stakeholders. We need you. You are important. It doesn't happen without you. And it's not as strong without you. So please stay engaged, stay involved, and be in contact.
Okay, great. Thank you for that closeout. And that concludes our webinar. Thank you everyone for attending, and enjoy the rest of your day.